I get crazy. Yeah.
Okay.
You don't want to set me off.
Why did Nick Reiner allegedly take the lives of his parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner? On Sunday, December 14th, in their Brentwood, California home, Rob, 78, and Michelle, 68, were both allegedly sadly murdered by their 32-year-old son Nick, who had a lengthy history of substance addiction and mental health problems. Rob Reiner gained his initial fame in the 1970s, acting as Meathead in the sitcom All in the Family.
You are a meathead. What did you call me? A meathead, dead from the neck up.
Then went on to directing, producing, and even acting in many famous shows and movies.
$26,000 for one dinner!
We're going to break down Nick's relationship with his parents and psychologically piece together the evidence to reveal how this happened and why he allegedly did it. Now, let's get started.
Sometimes I just come out to gather my sick thoughts.
Nick Reiner has a lengthy history of substance addiction and mental health issues from a very young age, where by the age of just 22, Nick was reportedly in rehab 18 times and had several stints of homelessness.
Many people in the neighborhood say that the son Nick had been troubled his whole youth.
In 2016, Rob and his son Nick made a movie together titled Being Charlie, which depicted many of Nick's struggles with drug addiction.
I'm one of your constituents now. You wouldn't want to lose the governor's race by one vote.
You can either head back to treatment or live on the streets. It's your choice.
And working on this movie together seemed to help Rob better understand his son's struggles.
It forced me to understand a lot more of what Nick was going through, and I think it forced him to see what I was going through, and that brought us closer together.
And at this point, his family optimistically believed the worst was behind them, after Nick helped make this movie, hoping that Nick could be looked up to as a success story of overcoming addiction.
Life goes on. Life happens.
However, after the movie was released, Nick sadly relapsed again.
Yeah, I'm a big-time screenwriter, baby.
He's a big-time screenwriter, baby.
Nick apparently continued to struggle with drug addiction and mental health, and was living in the guest house on his parents' property.
It's impressive, but understated. Grand, but charming.
Even though he admittedly destroyed it previously.
Yeah, I went 10 rounds with my guest house. Got totally spun out on uppers. I think it was coke and something else, and I was up for days on end, and I started punching out different things in my guest house. Everything in the guest house got wrecked.
This is all starting to show us that his parents, Rob and Michelle, are becoming much more lenient with Nick.
Crazy good though, you ham. Every year I get so excited.
I got invited to Conan's Christmas party.
I have fantastic party.
On the evening of Saturday, September 13th, Conan O'Brien threw his annual holiday party at his home where Rob, Michelle, and their son Nick attended. But this was when it all sadly went downhill.
Sources telling NBC News that Rob Reiner and his wife took their son Nick to a party hosted by Conan O'Brien. And it was at that event, they say, that the 32-year-old began acting erratically, was disruptive, making other guests feel uncomfortable. And that led to an altercation with his own parents.
It was reported that he was asking guests at the party if they were famous. Rob and his son Nick allegedly had a very loud argument at the party where Rob told Nick his behavior was inappropriate. Rob and his wife Michelle then left the party to go home.
Nick interrupted former SNL comedian Bill Hader before storming off.
At 4 a.m., Nick curiously checked into the Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica. When hotel staff went into Nick's room Sunday morning for apparently daily maid service, they found the shower full of blood on the bed, and the room's window was covered by bed sheets. At around 2 p.m., when the massage therapist came to the Reiners' door for their scheduled session and no one answered, it appears that's when their daughter Romy was contacted due to concern for her parents' health and safety.
Her home is next door to the family tennis court and across from her parents' main house.
Upon entering and making her way into her parents' bedroom, this is where 28-year-old Romy sadly found her parents in bed with multiple stab wounds, including their throats cut. Although Rob was sadly already passed away, Michelle was allegedly partially responsive, mentioning Nick did this in a dying declaration. However, Michelle died soon after.
Verifying we have two
cardiac arrest.
Nick Reiner was spotted on video surveillance getting a drink at a convenience store gas station and was soon arrested at 9:15 p.m. near the USC campus without incident and subsequently charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. That's what we believe to be true so far in this case. So now let's piece together the evidence using psychology and behavior to gain a better understanding of why Nick allegedly did it and what may have occurred. That night, Nick was apparently addicted to substances again, and would help explain why Nick was acting so odd at Conan O'Brien's holiday party. Although Nick's mental health issues are mostly unknown, we know that by age 10, the Reiners hired yoga instructor Alana Zabel to help Nick calm some of his emotional outbursts.
So we're joined again by celebrity yoga instructor Alana Zabel.
Alana even wrote the book A Chair in the Air with the main character, little boy named Nicky. This all tells us that Nick has been apparently living with some less severe mental health problems, such as ADHD. It was reported that young Nick had very odd behavior where he would scream at the top of his lungs in an apparent attempt to gain attention. So this seems to tell us the parenting style of the household, where they may have been giving in to Nick because it was just easier than to hear him scream. However, this is not uncommon with parents where they were just given to a child because it's just easier than to hear them scream. However, the child starts to get involved into drugs, for example, it becomes a real problem. In his early teens, Nick sadly became addicted to numerous hard drugs, including opioids and methamphetamine.
I was a real nutcase. I was crazy. And I just, it was more than drugs. It's really always about more than that. And I needed a lot of that sort of discipline.
When parents give in to a child's tantrums early on, the child learns that pushing boundaries leads to getting what they want. Later in life, when something more serious like drug use comes into play, that same pattern can make it really hard for parents to set firm limits. The child might feel entitled that they can avoid consequences and keep pushing boundaries, leading to bigger and bigger conflicts. In the end, the family ends up in a tough cycle where early habits of giving in make it much harder to handle serious issues later on.
I would listen to them, and the whole idea of tough love and you have to be a certain way, and it's not my nature. It's not the way I am built, but I went and did that.
And if you notice here, it seems that Rob tries to avoid confrontation with his son.
It's not my nature. It's not the way I am built.
What worked is when they kind of were like, you know what, they turned their back and they were like, you know, you got to figure it out for yourself. You're an adult now, this is getting old.
Now watch this clip of Rob and Nick being interviewed together and see what you think.
Anybody with a desk and a diploma, I would listen to them. I know my child better than an expert does, and I probably should have trusted my own instinct. And that's one of the things I did learn about the whole experience.
As someone who has many desks and diplomas, what Rob said there is sadly very common and also very dangerous. First, not all professionals in any field are exactly the same, so it's important to find the right fit. However, the problem is that knowing someone personally does not equate to having clinical objectivity. You know why? Right, it's because emotional closeness can actually impair judgment. Furthermore, when addiction takes hold of someone, the person they know is no longer the same person because the addiction overrides who you believe them to be.
I know Nick better than, some expert who's never met him. And I think had I listened to my own instincts, I would have done a lot better by Nick.
Therefore, the expert actually knows Nick quite well because they're trained and experienced in addiction behaviors, which are often more common among those who are addicted to substances. This is not saying that Rob should have just blindly gone along with whatever the expert said, but instead inquisitively question and challenge the expert from a position of collaboration, rather than looking at it as either going my way or the expert's way. Now watch this clip and see what you think of Rob's idea of what he could have done instead of putting Nick into rehab.
And I think that's where we made the mistake. Just the whole idea of throwing him into a rehab place, just saying, okay, and there's a punitive aspect.
But if you hadn't done that, how could you treat him you couldn't treat him on your own?
No, not on our own, but we could have maybe just worked with him with a therapist and, been a little bit more active in that way. I think we just overreacted.
Right, here in 2016, Rob is basically saying they could have done a better job at treating Nick's substance addiction at his Hollywood mansion than putting him into a rehabilitation facility.
I think we just overreacted.
This mentality is sad, common, and dangerous. It's dangerous both to the patient and to their family. Most parents feel guilty putting their child in a locked treatment facility. However, sometimes that's what's needed to get their child better. Do you know why this type of do-it-yourself method is often not successful? Right, because overcoming substance addiction requires more than just therapy in your family's guest house.
What about when you wrecked the guest house on meth? You don't want to tell that story?
Yeah, I went 10 rounds with my guest house.
Psychologically, this is called hindsight bias. This is where Rob looks back at the work the rehabilitation facility apparently did to help Nick get sober, and now thinks he could have just done that in his backyard with just a visiting therapist to avoid feeling bad that he put his son in a locked treatment facility. And did you notice Nick's body language when his dad was saying what he will apparently do in the future?
We could have maybe just worked with him with a therapist and, been a little bit more active in that way. I think we just overreacted.
Right, Nick was not nodding in agreement with his father in understanding what may have worked better for Nick, but instead seems to be calculating that there's now probably going to be little to no penalty for relapsing again. Since Nick here in 2016 now knows he won't have to be locked in a rehabilitation facility all the way up in Maine again.
I'm sick of this cycle, this using drugs, it being so temporary, the fix, then going back into a place for months on end, then getting out and just, rinse, wash, repeat.
This being my life.
Yeah.
The penalty for relapsing now is what? Right, just to live in his parents' guest house and talk to a therapist a few times a week? It's no wonder that shortly after this interview, Nick sadly relapsed again.
I kind of knew that I wanted to relapse, basically. I don't even want to call it a relapse. I just wanted to get back to my old life. I got back on dope and other things.
How did you go from just smoking weed and the occasional Adderall to relapsing on dope in the first place?
Well, how do you think? I'm a drug addict.
Did he know you had been a heroin addict in the past?
Yeah, he knew.
And apparently in recent months, he was so addicted to consuming hard drugs than ever before, just hanging out in his parents' guest house.
Wandering the Brentwood estate, where he allegedly killed his parents.
Say and spell your first and last name for me.
I ain't gotta tell you my first and last name. Most people know me as Did David.
And listen to what Nick said about being around his friends who do drugs.
Can you be in a room now where people are drinking or smoking pot or something, or do you consciously avoid those situations?
No, I want to be there when they're doing that, because I don't want to feel alienated like I'm some, special case, or I don't want to feel any different or alienated. I just want to be part of the crew again, and just not do that other stuff.
Right, Nick still hangs out with his apparent substance-addicted friends, so of course it was only a matter of time before he relapsed again. And this is in no way to absolve Nick of these murders, because voluntary intoxication is not typically a good legal defense to homicide, and is not typically considered temporary insanity. So if I'm guessing, Nick's legal defense is going to claim that he has some other major mental illness that caused him to do this, more than just ADHD. You're surely wondering, how does being on drugs contribute to a person acting with extreme violence to murder? In this case, the apparent combination of many drugs, such as both uppers and downers together, can not only cause prolonged sleep deprivation, but also likely impair judgment, distort perception, and remove normal impulse control, which may cause a person's pre-existing emotional dysregulation to escalate to extreme violence.
You don't seem very fiery to me. You seem like you might just...
I get crazy.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
You don't want to set me off.
Basically, drugs do not cause a person to commit violence, but they may make a person more impulsive, emotionally unstable, and less capable of them inhibiting those pre-existing violent desires and urges. Therefore, that night at Conan O'Brien's holiday party, when Nick got into a major argument with his parents...
Some big blow-ups there.
No, we both can get pretty...
You don't roll easily either.
No, we can both get pretty hot, and there were times when we did get hot.
If Nick was so angry that he wanted to physically harm his parents, especially since he's been known to express his anger through physical aggression...
Yeah, I went 10 rounds with my guest house.
When you're punching these things out, what is it to relieve some tension? Is it
he's high?
I know, but is there any?
You're crazy.
You're crazy. Well, I mean, but is there any logic at all that translates into that you can remember and that can translate into real life that still makes no logic? It's just this thing's going right now, boom, and then you.
Yeah.
It's sadly more likely that those violent impulses overrode any sober restraint that he may have had in the past.
We're also seeing eerie new surveillance footage of Nick Reiner late Saturday night, casually strolling outside a gas station near his parents' estate. He was on his way to his parents' mansion, where cops say he carried out the slaughter. Notice he's wearing a baseball cap and carrying a black backpack.
And sadly snuck into their bedroom with the only weapon he had access to at that moment. Logically and sadly, he first incapacitated Rob, his father, with the usage of that knife, followed by Michelle, his mother. Given that there were sadly excessive stab wounds, indicates rage and personal hatred, possibly blaming his parents for his poor circumstances.
Both appear to suffer fatal stab wounds.
And if you're wondering, this is not an easy way to go if there is such thing, especially if certain anatomic structures are initially missed. Nick allegedly then leaves their Brentwood house because even Nick would know this is not going to look good for him when the sun rises. He apparently makes his way to Santa Monica at 4 a.m. using his credit card to check into the Pierside Hotel, which is likely a familiar and safe-feeling location for Nick. In moments when perpetrators feel they're in danger, they often subconsciously choose to hide away in an area that is most familiar to them, where they have felt safe in the past. After checking into his hotel room, he apparently hangs a bedsheet to cover the window, likely due to paranoia that his room's curtains will electronically open, fearing that they will reveal himself to aerial surveillance. Paranoia is common in stimulant intoxication and severe sleep deprivation because excessive dopamine and norepinephrine activation in the brain heightens threat perception and disrupts their ability to distinguish between real and imagined threats. Nick apparently showers and changes his clothes, leaving their room and bathroom bloody, which the maid service found later that morning. At this point, even Nick surely realizes that staying at the Pierside Hotel is a bad idea. Do you know why? Right, he realizes he's going to be a prime suspect and he just checked into that hotel with his credit card. Not to mention there was only one egress, so if the police knock on that door, it's all over for Nick. He likely leaves that hotel room in the mid-morning to make his way towards the University of Southern California campus. Surely another familiar area. This was where he surely spent time partying with his rich friends as a young adult, because USC is only 20 minutes from Brentwood. A late afternoon, a bolo be on the lookout was issued for him once his sister confirmed that her brother was likely involved. He was spotted on video surveillance footage buying a drink at a gas station convenience store and was quickly arrested at 9:15 p.m. nearby. Do you know why rich Hollywood children so often get addicted to drugs? Yes, this is psychologically because they grow up with extreme access to money, substances, and adult environments, while often lacking consistent structure, boundaries, and accountability. And sometimes, even at the same time, they face intense identity pressure, public scrutiny, and emotional isolation, which can create chronic stress and a sense of emptiness. And oftentimes their parents are extremely busy, focused on their careers, and spend limited time with their children. Substances then become an easy and socially normalized way to cope, self-regulate, or escape feelings they were never taught how to manage. A lot of money along with fame and less time spent involved in raising their children can quietly destabilize children emotionally and developmentally. Hollywood is usually a terrible place to raise children. RIP to Rob and Michele Reiner, and our condolences are with their friends and family during this difficult time. Now in the comments, why do you think raising children in Hollywood can be so destructive to them? Let everyone know in the comments below. Subscribe for more. And if you want exclusive content and channel perks, hit that join button now below, because your support makes all of this possible. It's just so sad because it seems that Rob thought he could help his son on his own. He didn't need to lock his son in a treatment center in Maine like he was doing before. So apparently he was trying out working with his son in his guest house and maybe just having therapists come and go to help him there, as opposed to locking him away in a treatment center. But if he was in a treatment center, none of this would have happened. At the same time, Nick does need to be held responsible for his actions. It's just so sad because it could have been avoided. See you next time.